What if I told you that the most important continent for the next 50 years is not Europe or Asia, but Africa? Welcome back to the Misinformation Podcast. I'm Z, aka the Reluctant Accountant, and today I'm asking the question, is the world finally waking up to Africa's potential or just exploiting it all over again? So Africa is the youngest continent on the earth. It is rich in natural resources, minerals, and talent, and it's home to some of the fastest growing economies in the world. In this episode, I want to explore Africa's economic rise, the growing debt crisis, the battle between China, the Gulf, and the West for influence, and finally, just because I'm in the UK and they hate to be left out, what's the UK's awkward post-Brexit role in all of it? So let's start. Africa's economic potential. So one of the things is, while growth is strong, unfortunately so is debt. More than 20 African nations are at high risk of debt distress. Many took cheap loans in the 2010s from China, the World Bank, and the private bond market. And so now with interest rates rising, currencies weakening, and commodity prices swinging, they are struggling to repay them. Some of the most indebted countries include Zambia, which defaulted in 2020 and is still in negotiations. There's Ghana, which is defaulted and is currently restructuring, and Kenya, spending half of its government revenue on servicing debt. That means half of the taxes that are paid in Kenya to the government are currently servicing the debt that it owes. And if you think about that, that's an incredible amount of money. And it also limits the way that that country can invest in itself, whether it can invest in schools, where it can fund hospitals, or pay for kind of renewable energy or infrastructure. So you might have heard this term, the phrase, the new scramble for Africa. And it's a reference to the 19th century colonial carve-up of Africa. But today, it's not Europe that's drawing the lines on the map. It's China, it's the UAE, Saudi Arabia, India, and yes, the West. So it will come as no surprise to anybody that has visited African nations in the past decade, or even the Caribbean, but Africa in particular, because that's where we're focusing on. China is Africa's biggest trading partner. They are building ports, they are building roads, they are building airports, and they are lending through what is called the Belt and Road Initiative. So what is the Belt and Road Initiative? It's a good question. Nobody asked, but I'm going to tell you anyway, just in case you can't be bothered to Google it. You're welcome. So the Belt and Road Initiative is something launched by the Chinese government in 2013. It's known in China as One Belt, One Road, or some people refer to it as the New Silk Road. And basically, it is a infrastructure development strategy or initiative, which they adopted to invest in more than 150 countries and international organizations. And so as part of that, that's what China's doing a lot with African nations and many other nations, where they're doing all this investment with roads and infrastructure in those countries. But as I mentioned before, it isn't just China. The Gulf are also invested in Africa. They are buying farmland, they are investing in African banks and fintech, and they are positioning themselves as diplomatic and economic mediators. And so what's everyone else doing? Well, there's always someone doing something else. So what we have also is the US and the EU are kind of trying to push back against China. They're trying to emphasize these value-based partnerships, but they're often lacking consistent policy and also just speed. And I think with this kind of new, I wouldn't say nouveau enlightenment, because I think there's a lot of people that are in this age of information choosing not to apply critical thinking or be properly informed. But with access to information being what it is, people are also kind of looking beyond the propaganda that comes from their own kind of internal governments, specifically in the West, and saying, really, do you really value partnerships? Is that what you're really looking at, a value-based partnership? Or are you upset and worried about the reduction in influence that you once held? And that's the thing. There's also this sentiment that what you're doing, what you're upset about is not China's role or the Gulf states' role. You're upset that it isn't you. So where's the UK in all of this? So let's talk about Britain. Post-Brexit, the UK government promised to kind of pivot to Africa. And obviously, we've heard a lot about dreams of deporting people to Rwanda, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't the kind of trade deals that we were expecting. Okay, so they wanted to pivot to Africa, and they spoke about more trade, more investment, and basically they wanted more influence. But what's actually happened? So the UK-Africa trade is still tiny if you compare it to China, India, or even France. The UK has cut its foreign aid budget from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5% of GDP, and I want to come back to that. And British business confidence has wavered due to political instability and risk aversion. So I do want to come back to the foreign investment thing because I find it, foreign aid in particular, because I find it really interesting. And I think that specifically in the UK, there are many people that have a really warped, or I would say have really missed the mark on what foreign aid is about. So just going off on a tangent a little bit recently, if you've been paying attention in the news, you will hear about Ibrahim Traore. Sorry, I don't know why that's like a mouthful coming up. Traore, the Burkina Faso leader who has rejected foreign aid. And, there's kind of an alliance that's coming with him, Burkina Faso and some other nations that are looking for auto-reliance. They're looking for self-reliance. They're looking to not receive money from other nations or other Western nations in this way. And I'm bringing this up not because I'm going to focus in this episode on Burkina Faso and the things that are going on there, but more because I want to deal with the perception of foreign aid, specifically in the UK and possibly in other Western nations as well. One of the things that I often see talked about, and I recently looked on reforms policies because I like to stay informed on what never let the enemy catch you slipping. So I would like to stay informed on what, other people are doing and what they're saying. And I looked at one of their policies, and one of the big things that they had was about cutting foreign aid. And there's this idea, look, we're wasting all this money, giving away this money to these other nations when we haven't taken care of our own. And whilst I thoroughly and vehemently agree that we should be looking after people that are disenfranchised or the most vulnerable people in this society, this idea that foreign aid is out of the goodness of our hearts is so funny to me. And it's one of the things that really grinds my goats when I see this online, because I think there are people that believe foreign aid is out of our benevolence. That's why the UK gives foreign aid, is because we are just such generous people, such kind-hearted people, that we see all of these poor brown and black babies around the world, and we just give out this foreign aid because we are such great people. And I want you to take a moment and think about this and take out, the whole white man's burden of it all, and this whole idea that we are just this morally superior group that really just wants to help out other nations. Fundamentally, the system that operates globally for Western nations and for other nations that are subject to it is capitalism. And under what capitalist ideology would you believe that we would give away money for the fun of it? Why would we give away money and not get anything in return? And so this idea that foreign aid is given and is not reciprocal and reciprocated and doesn't bring value into this country is so ridiculous to me. It screams of people not reading the label. So I was looking into it, and I wanted to, because I could sit here and ramble about this, and, by and large, I do know what foreign aid is used for, but I was looking into it and I wanted to kind of pull up some specific things that people probably don't know about foreign aid. So first of all, it plays a very significant role in fostering international relations, in diplomatic ties, stability, and also advancing the donor country's strategic and economic interests. So this isn't a gift that you're just giving to someone and saying, do with it what you will. Oh no, friends. No, that's not what happens at all. Foreign aid is used to strengthen trade and economic ties. It opens the doors for trade agreements and investment opportunities. It means that the recipient country may often favour the donor country in investment or in trade deals, or when there is a tender process or anything like that. You've got securing access to resources Africa has the most resources. We're giving away this money because we want access to those resources in order for us to do things and exploit them. It stimulates domestic industries. And when I use the term domestic, I am not talking about domestic in the recipient country. I'm talking about the donor country, because a lot of aid that people don't realize, a lot of aid is tied aid. And what tied aid is when I give you money, but I say you have to spend it in my auntie shop. You have to spend it in my uncle's shop. So I'm not giving you this money untethered. It's not, you don't have free reign. You get the money, but you have to spend it on our industries. And what does this do? This boosts demands for the donor companies' products, services, or whatever that may be. They give foreign aid also because it enhances their geopolitical influence. Essentially, we're calling it foreign aid, but is it aid? Is it a bribe? Is it I scratch your back, you scratch mine? Although certain countries don't have huge voting power, they still have some. And that is worth something. If you're trying to get something passed, that is worth something. And so what they do is they will remember, oh, remember I gave you that foreign aid when you're making your vote today. Remember we gave you how much millions in aid for whatever problem that we probably caused in the first place when you're going to put your vote in the ballot. So I just want you to remember that while foreign aid is framed as like altruistic, it strategically benefits the donor country by expanding economic opportunities and securing resources. And it also, quite crucially, enhances their geopolitical leverage. So I just wanted to get that off my chest before I continued, because I think the whole foreign aid thing is one thing that really kind of gets to me when people speak about, well, we need to take care of our own country first. Literally, that is why they're giving foreign aid. It isn't because they really give about these people in the other countries. It's about how they benefit from that relationship. So I want you to bear that in mind. So some of the things, again, the UK is cutting its foreign aid. It's doing things to kind of British confidence has wavered, and we haven't had that. They have had some, essentially bright spots. So British firms are active in like telecoms, in mining, and in insurance. And the UK is invested in clean energy through companies like CDC, which is it used to be CDC, sorry. It's now the British International Investment. And we also still, because of the legacy of colonization and for various other reasons, we have cultural and educational links with Africa that do remain strong, especially through the Commonwealth. But the reality is the UK is playing catch up. But here's the big question that I think we need to sit with and think about. Is the West trying to partner with Africa, or are they just rebranding old patterns of extraction? Because I think about this a lot, and I think about this when people talking about, look, I'm going to move to Africa, things are better over there, and about our imperialist footprint. I sincerely believe that there are some things that are so entrenched within the UK as a culture, as a society, that it's very difficult for us to go and land these partnerships with leaving our egos at the door, without the history of that relationship remaining at the forefront of the negotiations and the way that we interact with these societies. And I say that because we see this when, for example, journalists, the lack of respect they have for leaders from the global south. You'll see a journalist interviewing even old, it could be Nicolas Sarkozy, some person that is not even a leader anymore, a European leader. And there is a respect and a reverence that is given and afforded to them that is not given to leaders from the global south. Indeed, you'll see journalists with their chest higher than anything, actively shouting at these leaders and trying to denigrate them and put them down. And it's so entrenched within our society that they're not held accountable. It's deemed perfectly acceptable to treat leaders like that.
Topic at the moment, it's being discussed around the world. Ghana President Mohamed Irfan Ali joins us live now from New York, where he's going to be addressing world leaders at the UN General Assembly on this subject later today. So we've got in early with you. Okay, let me ask you a question, Mr. President, on behalf of all of our viewers who would be covered by this. Why should somebody who maybe had an ancestor 7 or 8 generations ago, long before they were a twinkle in their great-great-great-great-grandparents' eye, why should they have to pay now for what an ancient ancestor did Or why should they apologise for what an ancestor did centuries ago? Why do they still carry that burden?
Oh, it's not a burden at all. You are one of the beneficiaries of that slave trade. So this is not a burden. You should be concerned, and you should pay, because you today are still benefiting from the greatest indignity to a human being, and that is the slave trade.
Can we just... You talked about how you don't want Israel, you're saying Israel, that October the 7th happened, you're placing that in historical context. I understand that. Please don't say that again. We don't have time for it. You've made that point 5 times already.
I don't know what you have time for.
Let me explain for the love of God, let me finish a sentence, man. Maybe you're not used to women talking. I don't know. But I'd like to finish a sentence, sir. Anyway, so...
No, you are misleading the public now by claiming...
Right, I've got 20 seconds left. I'm not even going to bother trying to answer. If you don't think Israel's reaction is acceptable, what would have been an acceptable reaction to you? You've got 10 seconds left.
To end occupation and allow peace to prevail for both people.
That's their reaction. Brilliant. Yeah. Sorry to have been a woman speaking to you, but there you are. Dr.
And then you have leaders such as the Orange Man that are not worthy of respect and can come on camera and just word salad and say a whole bunch of nothing. And this is analysed and scrutinised as though it is some literary prose worthy of anything more than like being ignored. And it's so crazy to me that these are things that we see every day. And if you point them out, people will try to explain it away. But essentially, it's because it's so embedded in us, this entrenched superiority complex, European superiority, that we're actually quite happy to behave in this way. And so if we are going to engage with African nations, if we are going to engage with Africa as a continent, I think we really need to think about the way that we do it and listen to what African nations say, because we don't know what's best for Africa. We don't know what's best for it as a continent. And I think it's really arrogant to think that we do, or even that we should. I think we need to invest in skills as well, not just in resources, because these countries have been so underdeveloped for so long, and quite deliberately as well, as a way to lock out the domestic nations from the resources that are literally in their backyard, that should be under their control, to lock them out of that. If we are serious about making strides to the future, we need to give people the skills, and we need to re-enfranchise them to counteract the disenfranchisement that has gone on for centuries and for decades. And following on from, things that I've spoken about BRICS, we also need to think about the reformation of, talking about reform, what needs to be reformed is those international institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank, to reflect African voices. And if you think this, first of all, if you look with this paternalistic notion that African nations can't possibly take care of themselves, they need us, well, I would ask you to seek and question where that take comes from. But I also think it's really interesting, because if I were to speak about the way that banks treat their customers in the UK, so forget Africa for a moment, I was to think about the way that banks treat their customers in the UK, the way that you're penalised for poverty, for example, the way that if you overspend over your overdraft, you often get charged penalties that don't make any sense, given the fact that if you're over your overdraft, you probably don't have that much money. So why are you fining me now for being poor rather than helping me to get out of this? We all understand this, and most people would see how this is illogical and also quite unfair. You're placing this heavy burden on the people that can't afford it the most. And I've spoken before, I did I think it was a TikTok about this woman talking about how when her account dropped below a certain amount, so I don't even think she was overdrawn, she was then charged for the use of that account. And she just thought about how ridiculous that was. In the time when she had the least money, she was being charged the most for being poor. And that's essentially what happens with these global financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank and these less well-developed nations. They get charged the higher interest rates. They get penalized the most. They have the least freedom to do with the resources that they obtain, the financial resources they obtain, what they want to do with it. And if we can understand it on an individual level, we should also be able to extrapolate from there and understand it on a national level and how this may impact a nation's ability to build, a nation's ability to help their citizens, and a nation's ability to thrive in this very much dog-eat-dog global capitalist market and environment and world that we live in. Africa is rising, but it isn't rising for someone else's benefit. And so I think the question that I'll end with is, are we ready to work with Africa, or are we going to just race to keep up? That's all I've got time for today. Thank you for joining me. I'm actually very happy. So just as a sidebar, and I'm sorry I'm waffling. If you want to log off now, you can, but it's a bit rude. I just thought I'd say, I'm trying to do this thing where I speak slower. I don't think I've managed it in this episode, but I think in the episodes to come, please let me know if I've achieved this, because I feel like I speak very quickly, and it's because I get excited. So I'm trying to be more deliberate and speak slower and think slower if I can. So I think I've kind of improved slightly in this episode. And I think it's an interesting one. I think it's something that we need to think about our relationship with these nations, and specifically in a time like now where we're seeing quite a big rise in populism, in more extreme right views, and this idea of superiority is very much on the table. We need to think about what role and how we want to see ourselves in that. And do we want to buy into that whole idea? Personally, as a Black person living in the UK, it's something that I think about a lot, because I didn't grow up in this country in a vacuum. And so how much of this superiority complex have I absorbed? And I'm often very conscious of it when I travel to other nations that have ideas and quite difficult relationships, historic relationships with the UK, and how am I coming across, and am I treading through that land as and being seen the same way that we see gentrifiers in our own country. And it's something that I kind of, as I said, I'm conscious of and I grapple with, but I think it's also something for people to take away and think about. Like, what is your footprint? What is the imperial footprint that you're leaving in those countries, and how are you treating those people and whatever? And I often have these conversations with people in different nations, and I'm very pleasantly surprised. I wouldn't say surprised, because that kind of comes across as a little bit like arrogant, as though they wouldn't know anything, but pleasantly surprised at how they seem to grasp the nuance of certain international affairs in a way that actually I don't see happening in the UK, because we don't have to question ourselves, because we often are positioned, and we position ourselves in this place of both moral, economic and political ideology of superiority. And so we look at those as lesser than. And it's often so interesting when you speak to other people and the nuance that they have, where they not only understand your perspective, but they can tell you why your perspective is perhaps incorrect, because you have this whole other perspective that is shared by maybe, millions of people across the globe that you haven't considered because you've never had to. And it's an interesting one. But that is all I've got time for today. Thank you for joining me once again. I will be back next week with another thrilling episode. I hope you found it thrilling. Even if you haven't, lie and say you have. Who cares? If you want to catch me on other platforms, I am available on TikTok at The Reluctant Accountant. That's The Reluctant Accountant. And also on Instagram, The Reluctant Accountant as well. If you are listening to this on either, one of the podcast platforms, if you want to catch the video, have a gander at what I look like, you can catch me on YouTube at The Reluctant Accountant. The channel is The Reluctant Accountant, and look out for the Misinformation podcast. But until next week, see you later.